quiet park at daybreak sets the scene for an encounter that will challenge prejudices and reshape an entire community. On his usual bench, an elderly man named Charles Thompson sits with a morning coffee in hand, unaware that a young police officer with a stern gaze is approaching, and even less aware that another figure is watching everything from afar. This seemingly routine confrontation soon escalates, exposing deep-seated tensions and unexpected alliances. In the aftermath, one question remains: how can a single moment between a stubborn officer and a courageous elder ignite a wave of change that touches everyone? Charles Thompson awoke just before dawn, the same way he had for as long as he could remember. He inhaled slowly, relishing the cool morning air that drifted through a cracked window, then carefully rose from the bed. Though in his late 70s, Charles refused to surrender to the aches and stiffness that came from the aging process. With measured steps, he prepared his usual ritual, brewing a small pot of coffee, skimming the day's headlines, and finally selecting one of the sturdy walking canes that had come to be a reliable companion whenever he ventured out. He lived alone in an old bungalow on Maple Avenue, a short walk from Oakleaf Park, a place that had held meaning for him since its dedication decades ago. Long ago, he had been a key voice in the council meetings that guided the park's creation, back in a time when people of all backgrounds had to fight for equal space. For Charles, heading there each morning was both a personal escape and a small celebration of what that park represented. By 7:00 a.m., he was on his way, cane in hand, wearing neatly pressed slacks and a light jacket against the morning chill. The neighborhood still felt sleepy as he passed front yards where sprinklers ticked rhythmically over manicured grass. It was an area that had changed drastically. Once a place of rampant inequality, now dotted with tree-lined streets, carefully maintained houses, and friendly neighbors who often waved or called out greetings. Still, beneath the tranquility, Charles knew that biases lingered. He had seen too much in his lifetime to think otherwise. He arrived at Oakleaf Park as the sun began to peek over the horizon. Its golden rays caught the broad leaves of the oaks, some of which he had helped plant himself as a younger man. He made his way to the spot that felt like a second home, a well-worn wooden bench near a flower bed that burst with color in spring. The bench's paint had grown chipped with time, but Charles cherished that small seat as if it were a prized chair by a warm hearth. He settled in, placed a travel cup of fresh coffee beside him, and opened his folded newspaper. Few people roamed the park at that hour, mostly joggers plugging away at their morning runs, or the occasional dog walker. These individuals waved or nodded. Some recognized him from years of casual conversation. Charles often swapped news with them, though he preferred to sit quietly and watch the park come alive. Sometimes he'd catch sight of children scampering toward the newly updated playground equipment, evidence that local leaders continued to invest in a place meant for everyone. This morning, however, Charles noticed something unusual. A figure loitered at the perimeter of the park, just beyond a line of manicured hedges. The person remained still, almost blending with the landscape. Charles felt no alarm. He'd lived too many years to take immediate fright at someone simply standing nearby, but it did lodge in his mind that perhaps this stranger was keeping watch or waiting for some cue. He turned his eyes back to the sports page. After a minute or two, the distant figure shifted position, though not enough for Charles to see any defining features. Strange as it was, Charles resisted the impulse to stare. He reminded himself that, in a public park, anyone had the right to stand, observe, or simply take in the morning light. He sipped his coffee, convinced that, sooner or later, the mystery would be revealed. Not long afterward, another individual entered the scene, this time from the main path that cut through the park's interior. He was younger, mid-20s or so, in a spotless police uniform that reflected the sunlight in sharp angles. The officer's badge glinted, and his posture suggested fresh academy training, rigid stance, brisk gait, hand resting over his belt. Charles recognized the type, new to the force, intent on asserting authority, perhaps still learning how to navigate the community he'd sworn to serve. Morning, Charles offered politely as the officer approached. He believed in courtesy, even in uncertain circumstances. Instead of returning the greeting, the officer, his nameplate read Daniels, fixed Charles with a suspicion-laced stare. "Sir," Officer Daniels said curtly, "what brings you to this area so early?" He surveyed Charles from head to toe, lingering as if gauging the older man's intentions. Charles blinked, taken aback by the sharp tone. "I'm just enjoying the park, officer. This is my routine most days: coffee, newspaper, and a bit of fresh air." Daniels pursed his lips, eyes narrowing. "Is that right? I don't think I've seen you here before. You live nearby?" His voice dropped to a low register that Charles recognized immediately. A challenge, implying that maybe Charles didn't belong. "I've been a resident of this neighborhood for over 30 years, Officer Daniels," Charles replied, maintaining a calm facade despite the tension crawling up his spine. "My house is on Maple Avenue, only a few blocks away." The young officer shifted his stance, resting one hand near the handle of his holstered sidearm. "You got any ID on you to prove that?" he asked, his tone neither polite nor helpful. Charles felt an uncomfortable flutter in his chest. He had encountered suspicious officers before, many decades ago, back when open bigotry was the norm. It stung to realize these problems still existed. Even now, stiffening his shoulders, he tried not to let anger bleed into his words. "Officer, I don't see why I'd need ID to sit in a public park. This place is for everyone." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We've been getting calls about trespassing, vandalism even. I'm just doing my job. I need to confirm who you are and what business you have here." "Vandalism?" Charles echoed, eyebrows rising. "I'm holding a cane and reading the newspaper. Hardly a threat, wouldn't you say?" He gestured to the bench, coffee cup and paper as evidence. The officer's expression remained icy. "Don't get smart with me," he muttered, stepping closer. "If you can't show proof of address, I'll have to ask you to leave. Otherwise, you might need to come down to the station." Charles's heart pounded, and he could feel the tightness in his chest intensify. Even so, he forced himself to stay calm. This was precisely the sort of intimidation tactic he had spent his life pushing back against. "Son," he said quietly, "I understand you're trying to do your duty, but I also know my rights. I'd appreciate it if you'd call your supervisor." A flicker of surprise crossed Daniel's face, then dissolved into a sneer. "Supervisor, huh? You don't give the orders here, old man." The officer's hand clamped down on Charles's arm, jerking him roughly. "That's it. You're coming with me to answer a few questions." Charles winced. Pain shot through his shoulder and his cane slipped off the bench. He gasped for air, hearing the blood rush in his ears. "Officer," he managed, "you're hurting me." Over Daniel's shoulder, Charles caught a brief glimpse of the figure who had been standing near the hedges. That individual was now approaching with swift determination. Before Charles could fully process it, a resonant voice broke through the tension. "Let go of that man, Daniels, right now." Daniels spun around, releasing Charles's arm. Charles staggered, struggling to remain upright. Relief and surprise coursed through him in equal measure as he recognized the new arrival, Chief Raymond Mitchell, one of the highest-ranking officials in the city's police department. Chief Mitchell carried himself with a quiet confidence. His eyes burned with anger, though it was tempered by a sense of grave disappointment. "Chief Mitchell?" Daniels stammered, his earlier bravado winking out. He was acting suspicious. I was just—" "Save it," the chief interrupted. "Mr. Thompson has lived in this neighborhood longer than you've been alive. He helped design this park, for heaven's sake. Now step aside." Daniels stepped back hastily, arms tight at his sides. Chief Mitchell reached for Charles's cane and offered it back to him with a gentle hand. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson," he said, guiding Charles back to the bench so he could sit down. "Are you all right?" Charles exhaled, placing a hand against his chest. "I'm a bit shaken, but I'll be okay," he managed. Glancing at Daniels, who stood pale-faced and stiff nearby, Charles felt a wave of familiar heartbreak and anger. This was not a new experience, just another in a line of ugly moments that had dotted his life. Chief Mitchell folded his arms, confronting the younger officer with a steely gaze. "We do not treat our neighbors like criminals without cause. You need to report to the station immediately to explain your conduct. I'll be there soon." His tone warned there would be serious repercussions. The younger officer mumbled a flustered apology and hurried away. Only then did the chief's severe expression soften as he turned back to Charles. "I owe you an apology on behalf of the department. I've been assessing our officers discreetly this past month. Never expected to catch an incident like this in the act." Charles nodded slowly, feeling the sting of tears he refused to shed. "My experiences told me this sort of thing never really disappeared," he said. "Still breaks my heart to see a young man carrying so much bias in a place meant for everyone." Chief Mitchell placed a comforting hand on Charles's shoulder. "This isn't over," he promised in a voice that shook with conviction. "We're pushing reforms to end exactly this kind of profiling. Daniels will be held accountable." As Charles's heart rate calmed, he managed a small, weary smile. "Thank you, Chief. You've grown into the kind of leader your father always wanted you to be." Mitchell gave a tight smile in return. "I learned from strong people in this community, like you, Mr. Thompson. We'll turn this ugly moment into something constructive." For a moment, Charles closed his eyes and let the morning breeze brush his face. He had fought many battles for justice, from protest lines to council chambers. Something told him this park confrontation was about to spark more change than any protest sign he'd once lifted high. Later that day, after Chief Mitchell had escorted him home to ensure his well-being, Charles sank into a chair in his cozy living room. Old photographs lined the walls, black and white images of civil rights marches, proud snapshots with community leaders, and city award ceremonies. Each photo represented both triumph and sacrifice. He settled on one picture, a much younger Charles wearing a modest suit, standing in a half-built oak leaf park, the ground still littered with construction materials. His smile in that photo was nearly incandescent. He'd truly believed the new park would be a beacon of unity and progress for everyone in the neighborhood, regardless of color. In many ways, that vision came true. Yet, the morning's event was a painful reminder that prejudice can linger in even the most hard-won spaces. Charles recalled how, as a child in the segregated South, he had been forced to attend meetings at local churches under cover of night, planning boycotts and rallies with neighbors who dared risk their lives for equality. The seeds of activism had taken root in him back then. Over decades, he helped register voters, ran for local office, and, in one memorable campaign, convinced the city council to let community members have a hand in the park's design. Oakleaf Park had blossomed into a communal haven, but old biases don't vanish in a single generation. Now, the baton had passed to modern leaders like Mitchell, who continued to address a system still marred by distrust. "It's all a cycle," Charles whispered to the silent house, hoping the cycle would ultimately bend toward fairness. The day after the incident, Charles received a phone call from Chief Mitchell, inviting him down to the station. "We'd like you to make a statement," Mitchell said gently, "but there's also someone I want you to meet." Intrigued, Charles agreed. That afternoon, he walked through the station's sliding glass doors, nodding courteously at the receptionist. Mitchell greeted him in the foyer, accompanied by a tall, imposing man in plain clothes. The man's expression was reserved, but respectful. "Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Aaron Daniels," Mitchell explained. Charles recognized the same surname as the young officer, but the older detective carried himself with a starkly different aura, calm, collected, and solemn. Detective Daniels was the one observing the park that morning. He's on an internal assignment, overseeing officer conduct. Charles's eyebrows rose. "You're related to Officer Daniels?" The detective sighed, giving a small nod. "He's my nephew," he admitted. "We share the same last name, but that's where the similarity seems to end. I've been placed in a position to assess how junior officers engage the public, especially in areas with a history of mistrust." Detective Daniels explained he had watched that morning's events unfold, documenting it for an internal review. "I wanted to see how far my nephew would go. I hoped he'd simply talk to you politely, but when he grabbed you, I knew it was time to step in. I alerted Chief Mitchell, who was also nearby observing." Charles absorbed this new information. He realized that if not for Detective Daniels' secret mission, the altercation could have ended far worse. "Thank you," Charles said earnestly. "I hope your nephew can learn from this as well." "I do too," the detective replied, offering a business card. "If there's anything you need, any assistance, or if you want to file a formal complaint, I'm your point of contact. The department needs to acknowledge where it's failing." Charles took the card and gave a slow nod. Then, with a resolute exhale, he turned to the chief. "I'll give my statement. But I also want to do more than that. Let me talk to your officers, share my experiences. If I can help bridge this gap, I want to try." Chief Mitchell's face lit with relief. "I was hoping you'd say that." Word traveled fast in the neighborhood. Within days, discussions about officer misconduct led to community meetings, urgent demands for better police training, and fresh calls for unity. Charles was at the center of it, much as he'd been during the civil rights era. At one gathering in the local community center, rows of metal folding chairs were packed with neighbors, some furious, some fearful, some simply curious. Charles stood at the front, leaning on his cane as he carefully described what had happened in the park. He made sure to emphasize that Officer Daniels' behavior reflected a deeper problem, not just a personal failing. A woman named Shanice, carrying her infant daughter, tearfully recalled how her teenage brother had been stopped several times in the same park. "How many more times do we have to prove we live here?" she asked. "We pay taxes, we abide by the laws, yet we're singled out for walking near the playground at night." The crowd murmured in agreement. Another man, a local shop owner, spoke up. "We need accountability from the top down. If new officers bring biases, who's training them? Who's telling them it's okay to treat neighbors like criminals?" Chief Mitchell, seated among residents, rose and addressed the group directly. He promised an investigation, more thorough bias training, and a transparent review board comprised of local citizens. "We can't mend relationships with empty words," Mitchell told them. "We need structural change, both in policy and in how we recruit and educate our officers." By the end of the evening, the atmosphere crackled with both tension and cautious optimism. Charles shook hands with people as they left, noticing renewed energy in their eyes. For many, this was a turning point, an opening to discuss issues that had simmered unspoken beneath the surface. Charles thought back to when he first pitched the idea of Oakleaf Park to the city. Back then, change had felt equally precarious, teetering between hope and resistance. Yet the park was eventually built. Perhaps the same determined spirit would transform the police force too. Behind the scenes, Officer Daniels faced suspension while Internal Affairs conducted interviews. He refused to make a public apology at first, claiming he was simply doing his job. Anger brewed among certain groups, defending him people who believed that Charles's story was overblown. Another faction staunchly supported Charles, demanding Daniels's immediate dismissal. To Charles, this fracturing debate signaled the necessity of deeper healing. He'd lived through countless divides, from the 1950s through the heated battles for civil rights legislation. In every case, Animosity flourished when misunderstandings festered without dialogue. One afternoon, Charles returned to the station. Several officers, including Chief Mitchell and Detective Daniels, sat around a large table. They had invited Charles to speak to the officers who were genuinely interested in hearing from him. It was an informal session meant to explore how law enforcement could interact respectfully in diverse communities. The moment Charles entered, he felt a hush fall over the room. He wasn't sure if it was reverence for his age or guilt that someone of his standing had been mistreated under their watch. Either way, he cleared his throat and spoke plainly. "I'm not here to shame or scold," he said. "I know many of you chose this profession to protect and serve, but there's a gap in trust, especially for black residents who've been on the receiving end of harsh policing for generations. I'm old enough to remember when there weren't any black officers at all, let alone a black police chief. We've come a long way, and yet the past lingers in the present." He paused, letting his words settle. When Officer Daniels demanded I prove I belong in my own neighborhood, it stirred a lifetime of memories. Memories of water fountains marked four-colored of bus seats designated for people like me, of indignities endured daily. The reason I was so calm during the incident is because, unfortunately, I've been in that spot many times before. Many officers sat wide-eyed, some nodding in understanding. A few looked down at their feet, uncomfortable. Detective Daniels, arms crossed, listened intently. Finally, one young officer spoke up, voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Thompson, I never meant to do harm, but I realize now I might have overlooked my own biases when I approach people. What do you think we should do as officers to fix that?" Charles offered a kind but firm smile. "Start by remembering you're dealing with human beings, neighbors, grandparents, children, and yes, there will be times when you need to act quickly. Crime is real, but that doesn't excuse painting everyone you meet with the same brush." The session lasted over an hour, filled with stories and admissions of fear, confusion, and a desire for direction. Chief Mitchell quietly promised to expand these dialogues station-wide. Detective Daniels, who mostly remained silent, later thanked Charles for his candor. "We can't fix a problem we refuse to see," he told Charles, shaking the older man's hand. As weeks went by, tensions gradually eased in the neighborhood. Officer Daniels' future remained uncertain, but the department did begin implementing changes. They brought in specialists for anti-bias workshops, started a mentorship program with local youth, and asked Charles to help organize monthly public forums at Oakleaf Park, where officers could meet casually with residents. Some changes were met with skepticism, window dressing. Critics called it, but Charles held on to optimism. He recognized that baby steps could become miles if persisted in faithfully. During one of these forums, Charles arrived early, found his usual bench, and settled down for a moment's tranquility. He watched parents trailing behind laughing toddlers, big dogs bounding through open fields. Despite the heartbreak of the incident, Oakleaf Park still radiated a sense of belonging. "Mind if I join you?" Charles looked up to see Officer Daniels standing a few paces away, sporting plain clothes instead of a uniform. An immediate flash of wariness passed through Charles, but he nodded, deciding to hear what the young man had to say. Daniels sat, hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been on leave," the officer began. "They're deciding whether I stay or go. And honestly, I'm torn myself. I grew up hearing certain stereotypes, and maybe I let them take hold. The more I reflect, the more I see how toxic those ideas were." Charles didn't respond right away. He studied the younger man's face, noticing genuine regret creasing his features. Officer Daniels continued, voice quiet. "I just want to say, I'm sorry. There's no excuse for what I did. If there's any way I can make amends, any way I can learn, please, point me in that direction." A breeze stirred the branches overhead. Charles let the silence stretch another beat. "I appreciate your apology," he finally said, "but the apology must go beyond words. Changing how you see people, how you act in tense situations, that's a daily choice. Are you prepared to do the work?" The young man nodded, gaze earnest. "I am." Charles rested his hand gently on Daniel's shoulder. "Then I'll do what I can to help you, but just know, trust takes time to rebuild. You'll have to be consistent." In that moment, something in the officer's posture shifted from defensiveness to humility, almost relief. "I understand," he said, then rose to join a growing circle of neighbors in the park center for the forum. Charles watched him go, the old ache in his chest softening slightly as he allowed himself a spark of hope. Over the next few months, the momentum built. Local newspapers reported improvements in police-community relations. The mayor publicly praised Oakleaf Park's monthly forums as a model for interactive dialogue. Charles found himself busier than ever, invited to share his lifetime of activism in schools, on community panels, and at city council meetings. High school students interviewed him for their civics projects, wide-eyed as he detailed the civil rights marches he once joined. A group of college interns, fresh off courses in social justice, invited him to speak about bridging generational divides. Everywhere he went, Charles emphasized that they were building on the work of past generations. "It's not an overnight fix," he would say. "Social change is like planting trees. You may not live to see them at their tallest, but you keep planting for those who come next." On a bright Saturday afternoon, the city unveiled an updated plaque near the entrance of Oakleaf Park, commemorating the community's commitment to equity. The ceremony brought out families, activists, and police officers alike. Chief Mitchell stood behind a podium, the plaque draped in cloth. Today, Mitchell announced, "We recognize both the progress made and the struggles that lie ahead. We reaffirm this park as a shared space, free from prejudice and fear." Then he motioned for Charles to join him at the microphone. "No one embodies that spirit more than Mr. Charles Thompson," he said. "Without his vision and his steadfast determination, none of us would be gathered here." Charles approached to scattered applause. Adjusting the microphone, he cleared his throat. "I'm honored," he began, voice resonating throughout the small crowd. "But we must remember that a plaque is a signpost, not a finish line. The real work of unity isn't about unveiling monuments. It's about unveiling our hearts, about being honest with one another and staying the course." He scanned faces, some smiling, some tearful. "When this park was first created, I believed it could bring people together if we let it. Today, we're choosing to let that happen." After the formalities, people clustered in groups, chatting and sharing ideas. Families strolled by the fountain Charles had helped fundraise for years ago. Even Officer Daniels, still uncertain about his career, joined in, speaking quietly with a group of teenage boys about how to interact with police. Charles noticed Detective Daniels standing at the edge of the crowd. Their eyes met, and the detective offered a small nod, as if to say he saw real progress in motion. Charles nodded back. Hope curled gently in his heart. Not long after that unveiling, Charles visited the community center again. This time, he was scheduled to talk with a group of local activists launching an outreach campaign. Among them was Shanice, baby now a toddler, and her teenage brother, who had once been hassled while playing basketball. Marcus, the brother, had a new sense of purpose. After enduring multiple stops by police, he wanted to ensure nobody else felt criminalized in their own city. Charles sat at a round table with them, discussing ways to expand the monthly forums. Marcus suggested bringing music or sports events to attract more youth participation. Shanice thought it would be helpful to organize Know Your Rights workshops. Another volunteer proposed inviting local business owners to sponsor scholarships for young people interested in public service careers. At one point, Marcus's voice trembled as he recounted the humiliations he'd faced. "I used to feel small," he admitted, "like the whole world saw me as trouble. but seeing you stand your ground, Mr. Thompson, gave me courage. I realized they can't take away my dignity unless I let them. Listening to the teenager, Charles recalled his own youth, the countless injustices he and his peers had faced, and the joy of seeing each small victory inch society forward. "I'm proud of you, Marcus," he said gently. "You've turned a painful experience into motivation. That's how true change happens." They wrapped up the meeting with enthusiastic handshakes and an unspoken vow to keep moving forward. Charles left the community center buoyed by their energy. He felt a quiet certainty that the next generation was more than capable of pushing boundaries further than his ever had. Several months slipped by, and at last the department concluded its internal investigation. Officer Daniels received a formal reprimand, coupled with mandatory training to address implicit bias. He was also temporarily reassigned to a less public-facing role while he worked through educational courses. Some neighborhood residents felt this was too lenient. Others believed it struck a balance between accountability and giving him a path to redemption. Curiously, Daniels continued showing up at community events, no longer in uniform, but volunteering to maintain the park grounds or help at youth basketball tournaments. Each appearance was a chance for him to regain shattered trust. Over time, people began to greet him with guarded nods. Healing, while slow, was not impossible. Another shift followed. Local newspapers reported a drop in complaints against police, fewer claims of harassment, and increasing attendance at council forums. This incremental improvement suggested that new policies were not mere window dressing, but part of a genuine structural shift. "Never thought I'd see the day," joked Charles when a friend showed him the headlines. That friend, a retired teacher, winked back. "You keep surprising us all, Charles." One crisp morning, the City Council organized a special event to celebrate the progress spurred by Oakleaf Park's dialogues. They called it the Day of Bridge Building, dedicated to reuniting community members, honoring Charles's contribution, and highlighting the police department's reforms. The park brimmed with life. Food trucks lined the streets. Local bands played upbeat music. Children dashed around under colorful banners, and a variety of booths showcased resources for everything from college scholarships to mentorship programs. Charles arrived to a hero's welcome, although he humbly tried to deflect the praise. He made his way to the dais erected near the fountain that bore his name, pausing to trace the engraved letters. Memories swept him back to the park's opening decades ago, the pride he had felt that day and the pain he recently suffered here. Both were part of the park's story and his own. At midday, the mayor stood at a microphone, publicly recognizing Oakleaf Park's role in fostering unity. She then invited Charles to speak. He leaned his cane against the podium and inhaled the sweet scent of popcorn from a nearby vendor. "I've seen a lot in my time," he began, gazing at the crowd that included old friends, new allies, officers in uniform, and families of every background. "I've seen laws change, neighborhoods bloom, and hearts soften. And I've seen regression too, where old prejudices resurface like weeds." He paused, letting the hush linger. "None of it will matter if we don't keep working. This park was once a dream. Today it's a stage for healing. Tomorrow it can be a beacon that illuminates the path for every city wrestling with these same problems." Applause rippled out. Charles lifted a hand. But real applause belongs to everyone who's chosen to stand up for what's right. You a room full of people who said enough is enough and who refuse to let one negative moment define us. You're the reason we can celebrate progress and keep pushing ahead. He ended his speech feeling a glow of optimism. For the rest of the afternoon, he wandered the crowd, greeting neighbors and reveling in the sense of camaraderie. At one point, he spotted Officer Daniels by a balloon arch, chatting with local teenagers. Their body language suggested a genuine conversation, not suspicion. Charles caught the officer's eye and offered a nod, recognizing that life's greatest transformations often begin with the humblest gestures. By evening, lights twinkled through the trees, and a small jazz ensemble played near the fountain. Some people danced on the grass, others sat on blankets, enjoying the mild weather. Charles found himself on his old favorite bench, reflecting on how the day, indeed, the entire year had unfolded. He heard laughter from a nearby group of kids chasing each other, no one caring about differences of appearance or background. Shanice offered a warm wave from across the lawn, where she stood holding her toddler's hand. Detective Daniels, in casual clothes, approached to check on Charles and let him know everything was running smoothly. Charles turned his gaze to the star-dotted sky, allowing a peaceful sigh. He felt deeply grateful to be alive at this moment, to witness another generation step into leadership. The story was not over, but it no longer rested solely on his shoulders. The seeds planted long ago had taken root, and new gardeners were tending them. Thank you for joining Charles Thompson's journey, one that began with a simple morning routine in Oakleaf Park and grew into a far-reaching movement for respect and unity. His refusal to be silenced sparked policy changes, personal transformation, and a new generation ready to shape a more inclusive future. If his story moved you, make sure to like this video so more people can discover it. Share it with friends and family who believe in the power of standing up for what's right. And most of all, subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Each of us has the power to impact our communities. Sometimes it just takes one moment of courage. Let's continue to build bridges, champion compassion, and inspire each other one story at a time. We'll see you in the next video.